When you hear the phrase data privacy regulation, just be honest, where does your mind go?
For Brussels, every time.
Brussels, right? Or maybe California with CCPA. It's like this automatic reflex we all have.
It is. It's the default setting for the whole industry.
Hmm.
We see the West as the center of gravity for regulation, and if it's not happening in the EU or the US, it sort of gets ignored.
Which is exactly why we are flipping the map today. We're looking at a presentation by Winnie Nagige. It's called African Data Protection Frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
And her argument is that the most dynamic, probably the most high-stakes story in privacy right now is not happening in Europe at all. It's happening all across the African continent.
And if you haven't been watching this space, you are genuinely missing the bigger picture. Engage, she calls herself a data protection whisperer, which is just a great title.
It is a great title.
And she lays out this landscape that has gone from, almost total silence to an absolute roar in less than a decade.
She frames it around this core tension, and I think every business feels this, but it's just amplified here. She says, data moves seamlessly, laws do not.
And that is the friction point. I mean, think about the economic reality. Africa is in this lightning-fast digital transformation.
Right.
You've got fintech just blowing up in Nigeria, health tech in Kenya. Mobile money is everywhere. Data is literally the new infrastructure.
Yeah.
But the laws, they're trying to catch up to borders. That data just leaps across in a millisecond.
And that's the headache, isn't it? If you're a compliance officer, seamless data versus fragmented laws is pretty much the definition of a very bad day. You want one rule, you get 54.
It's the definition of risk. It's not just an inconvenience. It's about real liability.
Speaking of navigating that risk, before we dive in, I have to say, if just hearing the phrase fragmented laws kind of raises your blood pressure, you really need to check out globalcompliancemap.com and www.compliancehub.wiki. We are going to be talking about so many moving parts today, different regions, different enforcement styles, and having a reliable map is honestly the only way to stay sane.
Oh, absolutely essential. You can't navigate this kind of terrain blind.
So let's get into the roadmap Engage gives us. She breaks it down into, what, 3 main currents?
Yeah, pretty much. We've got the constitutional roots of these rights, then what she calls the alphabet soup of regional bodies.
The alphabet soup, yeah.
And then the part that really got my attention, the enforcement explosion we all saw last year in 2025.
Okay, let's start with the roots, because there's this myth, and I hear it all the time, that all these African privacy laws are just, modern bureaucracy.
Right, like someone just decided to add red tape to the digital economy because it's the trendy thing to do.
Exactly. Oh, Europe has a law, so we need one too.
And Engage just corrects that right away. She points out that privacy in Africa isn't a regulatory invention, it's a constitutional one.
Meaning it's already baked into the foundation of the country.
Explicitly. If you look at the constitutions of, say, Kenya, South Africa, Tanzania, Nigeria, privacy is enshrined right there as a fundamental human right. It is not a nice to have.
Wow.
It's part of the Bill of Rights.
Okay, so let's unpack that.
Yeah.
When a country like Kenya passes a Data Protection Act, the act itself isn't creating the right to privacy.
No, not at all. It's operationalizing it. It's taking a right that already exists in the supreme law of the land and just building the mechanism to enforce it. The right was always there. The regulation is just the user manual for how to protect it.
That distinction feels incredibly important for any business operating there. It means you're not just, breaking some bureaucratic rule.
Right.
You are technically violating a constitutional right.
Which carries a much, much heavier weight in court.
Yeah.
And she traces this all the way back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. So this isn't new. What's new is the machinery to actually enforce it.
But okay, let's address the elephant in the room, the big, blue, star-spangled elephant.
The GDPR, the famous Brussels effect.
Right. There's this cynical view that says, okay, sure, it's constitutional, but really, didn't these countries just copy-paste the GDPR so they could do business with Europe?
Right.
I mean, the laws do look pretty similar.
It is a common critique, but the source material argues it's way too simplistic. She says it's a misunderstanding of what legal imperialism is.
How so? If the laws look just like GDPR, isn't that proof of influence?
Influence, yes.
Yeah.
Imperialism, no.
Oh.
She says it was about economic survival and just, timing. Look at the timeline. GDPR drops in 2016.
Okay.
At that exact moment, African nations are trying to plug into the global digital economy. They want to host data centers. They want their BPOs, their business process outsourcing, to handle European customers.
And to do that, you need adequacy.
Exactly. Adequacy is the golden ticket. Is the EU basically saying, your laws are strong enough that we trust you with our citizens' data? So the GDPR acted as a trade gatekeeper.
So it's less about Europe forced us to do this and more about we need to plug into the global grid and, well, this is the plug.
Precisely. It was a strategic economic decision.
Yeah.
You can't process global data if your local laws don't speak the global language. They adopted things like independent supervisory authorities and data subject rights because they needed a globally interoperable framework.
That makes perfect sense. But here's where it gets messy. Africa is a massive continent, 54 countries. You can't have 54 totally different versions of this or, trade just grinds to a halt. How do they coordinate?
This is where we wade into what English calls the alphabet soup of regional bodies.
Yeah.
And honestly, this is probably the most complex part of the whole landscape.
Just looking at the acronyms in the presentation makes my head spin.
Yeah.
You've got the AU, the RECs. How does this hierarchy actually work?
Okay, think of it as layers of influence. At the very top, you have the African Union, the AU. They've got the Malabo Convention, which dates all the way back to 2014.
2014. That feels like ancient history in tech years.
It does. And the source notes it suffered from slow ratification. It took almost a decade to actually come into force, which it finally did in June 2023. The AU also has these big strategies, but there's a catch with the AU level.
Always a catch.
These AU instruments are largely what's called soft law.
Soft law. Okay, that sounds gentle. Define that for us.
Think of it as a very strong suggestion versus a direct command. They set high-level principles, they point the ship in the right direction, but they don't create a binding legal obligation that a country must enact tomorrow. It's guidance.
So the AU says you really, really should do this. Who's the one that says you must do this?
That would be the regional economic communities, or RECs. This is where the real teeth are. Look at ECOWAS in West Africa.
Okay, that's Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal.
Correct. ECOWAS has something called a Supplementary Act from 2010. And unlike the AU documents, this act is binding on its member states.
So if you join ECOWAS, you are signing up for the data rules whether you like it or not.
Yes. And that binding nature is exactly why we saw countries like Nigeria, Senegal, and Cote d'Ivoire move relatively early to pass these strong laws. The regional body basically forced the issue.
What about the other regions? Did they all do that?
SADC in Southern Africa took a slightly different path. They created a model law back in 2013. It wasn't binding, but as a template. It basically said, here's the code, adapt it for your country. It drove harmonization just by giving everyone the same starting point.
And East Africa.
The EAC, they focused really heavily on cyber laws way back in 2008 and are now working on a big data governance policy framework. So you've got West, South, and East all moving at different speeds using different legal tools, but they're all kind of converging on the same basic standards.
It sounds like a patchwork quilt, but at least they're all using the same kind of thread.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
The destination is the same, even if the vehicle is different.
Okay, this is the big pivot point in the deep dive. Laws on paper are one thing. I can write a great law and stick it in a drawer. What really matters is enforcement.
Well, yeah. Compliance budgets are driven by fear of enforcement. If there's no cop on the beat, people tend to speed.
True. And before we look at who got hit with that fear recently, I just want to remind you that keeping track of which countries are enforcing which rules and, where the cops on the beat are most active, that is exactly what globalcompliancemap.com and www.compliancehub.wiki are built for. Because as we're about to see, the landscape just shifted dramatically in 2025.
NGIG calls it the enforcement explosion.
Let's open up the 2025 case files, because looking back from where we are now in early 2026, last year really felt like the moment the regulators finally took the gloves off. It wasn't just warnings anymore. What was the turning point for you?
The case that sent a real shockwave was in Kenya. Republic versus Tools for Humanity Corp. Decided in May 2025.
Tools for Humanity, that's the WorldCoin project, right? The shiny silver orb scanning people's irises for crypto.
That's the one. Yeah. And this was a massive high-hype project. But the Kenyan High Court stepped in. And this wasn't just some regulator issuing a fine. This was a constitutional battle. It signaled that Kenya was willing to halt a huge global tech project if they felt the data collection violated those constitutional rights we just talked about.
That is a massive statement. It just shatters the idea that big tech can just dazzle a developing market with some cool new tech and ignore the local rules.
Completely. It proved that innovation can't come at the cost of privacy. Yeah. And then you have Nigeria, the NDPC versus Meta platforms in 2025.
Taking on Facebook, that is not a small fight.
No, and it wasn't done quietly. It showed that African regulators are willing to tackle these dominant global platforms where they see data practices that disadvantage their local users. It was a real stand for digital sovereignty.
And we saw similar moves in Uganda with a case against Google in July. But there was one case from South Africa. It was technically late 2023, but the impact really hit in 2025 that I found fascinating because it wasn't against a tech company.
You're thinking of the information regulator versus the Department of Justice.
Exactly. The regulator sued the government.
In effect, yes.
Yeah.
The information regulator held their own Department of Justice accountable for a data protection lapse. And that is incredibly significant.
Why is that so rare?
Well, because in so many places, the state carves out exemptions for itself. It's that rules for thee, but not for me thing.
Yeah.
This case proved that in South Africa, government departments are held to the same standards as private companies. There is no immunity for negligence.
That sets a profoundly high bar. If the Department of Justice can get in trouble, you can definitely get in trouble.
Precisely. And Anguish pulls out 3 key takeaways from this whole explosion. First, foreign entities must register locally. The fly-in, fly-out model of data processing is over.
You have to have a legal footprint there. You can't just harvest data from a server in California.
Correct.
Yeah.
Second, regulators are getting creative. They're combining privacy law with consumer law. So if you have confusing consent forms, dark patterns, hidden checkboxes, they can hit you with both statutes.
Yeah.
It doubles liability.
And the third takeaway.
Cross-border compliance is the top priority. They are watching the data flows. They know where it's going, and they are demanding accountability for it.
Which brings us to, right now, 2026. So we've gone from constitutional theory to this regional patchwork to an enforcement bloodbath. What's the vibe on the ground today?
The source describes it as a new era of cooperation. We were seeing the emergence of what Engage calls African enforcement norms.
African enforcement norms. That sounds a little academic. What does that actually mean for a business?
It means that even though the laws aren't identical, word for word, across all 54 countries, the interpretation of those laws is converging. Similar facts are now producing similar penalties in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa.
So I can't just rely on some technicality in the Ghanaian law to save me if I've already been fined for the exact same practice in Nigeria.
Exactly. The silos are breaking down, regulators are talking to each other, they're using networks like NEDPA, REPDP, the Network of African Data Protection Authorities, and signing bilateral agreements to coordinate their investigations.
That changes the risk profile completely. You can't just hop across the border and hide.
No. And it's changed their standing globally. African DPAs are no longer just learning from Europe. They're positioning themselves as credible, equal counterparts. They're sitting at the main table now.
There was one last insight in the presentation that really surprised me, and it was about AI. Because everywhere I look, everyone is panicking about AI regulation.
Yes, this is so forward-thinking. While the EU and the US are still struggling to pass specific AI acts and arguing over definitions, African privacy regulators are, well, already regulating AI.
Without a new law.
They're just using the existing privacy frameworks. They look at an AI model and say, okay, this involves automated decision-making, this involves huge data sets, this involves consent. They don't need a new law to tell them that's a privacy issue. They are governing AI now through data protection.
Wow, that is incredibly nimble. It just bypasses all the legislative gridlock we're seeing everywhere else.
It is proactive regulation. They aren't waiting for permission to protect their citizens from things like algorithmic bias.
So, to recap this whole journey, we started with a constitutional promise. We moved through a complex web of regional harmonization. We saw this massive spike in enforcement in 2025 against the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah.
And now, in 2026, we have a unified, cooperative regulatory bloc that's already regulating cutting-edge tech like AI.
It's a massive success story for the rule of law.
Right.
But for a business, it requires a complete and total rethink of your strategy.
And that gets us to the final thought. If you're a compliance officer listening to this, you might be tempted to treat Africa as 54 separate checkboxes. Okay, I've got my Kenya lawyer, I've got my Egypt lawyer.
Which is the old way of thinking.
Yeah.
And it's really dangerous now. With the rise of these continental enforcement norms, the smart play is different.
What's the play?
Stop trying to comply with 54 different laws. Stop looking for loopholes in the weaker jurisdictions. Instead, you need to adopt a single, high-standard, Africa-wide risk governance strategy.
So treat the entire continent as a single regulatory block.
Exactly. Take the strictest standards, which is probably a blend of Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, and just apply them everywhere you operate. If the regulators are converging, your strategy has to converge too. It's the only way to future-proof your business.
Build the fortress to withstand the strongest attack, and you're safe everywhere. That is excellent advice.
It's really the only scalable way forward. If you try to play whack-a-mole with 54 regulators who are all talking to each other on WhatsApp, you are going to lose.
Winnie Ngija's presentation was a real eye-opener. It just completely challenges that old narrative that the West drives all privacy innovation.
Absolutely. The center of gravity is shifting, and it's shifting south.
Thank you all for listening to this deep dive. If you want to visualize that shifting center of gravity and figure out how to build that fortress we were just talking about, do not forget to check out globalcompliancemap.com and www.compliancehub.wiki. They are the tools you need to stay ahead of this curve.
Highly recommended.
We'll be back with another deep dive soon. Until then, keep asking questions and keep watching those borders.
Goodbye, everyone.